This story is entitled Sister-in-Law Stole My Skincare, Got Chemical Burns, and Mother-in-Law Blamed Me, so I took legal action. Now they're begging for forgiveness. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. I need to get this off my chest because it's been weighing on me for weeks. My 16-year-old sister-in-law ignored my clear boundary, repeatedly used my prescription skincare without permission, and ultimately gave herself chemical burns. Was I justified in holding her and her family accountable, or was I too harsh? My husband, 28 male, and I, 26 female, finally bought our first house 7 months ago. It's a small but cozy place, nothing fancy. Moving in together was a huge step for us, and while it's been amazing to have our own space, it's also been exhausting. You don't realize how much work goes into maintaining a house until it's your responsibility. Between unpacking and trying to make the house feel like a home, I've barely had time to catch my breath. Still, I was proud of what we'd accomplished. That is, until my sister-in-law started treating our house like her personal hangout spot. Let me set the stage. My sister-in-law, a 16-year-old female, let's call her Sarah, just got her driver's license, so she's been popping by our house like it's no big deal. At first, I thought it was sweet. I figured she just wanted to spend time with her brother. But then it became a lot. She started showing up unannounced, and it felt like every other day she was at our door. Sometimes she wouldn't even knock. She'd just let herself in if the door was unlocked. She'd plop down on our couch, scroll through her phone, and act like she lived there. I tried to brush it off. She's a teenager after all, but it was starting to wear on me. To make matters worse, she has zero concept of boundaries. None. She'll go through our fridge, use our stuff without asking, and take over the TV remote like she owns the place. And it's not just her actions, it's her attitude. She's made these snarky little comments that I can't help but feel are aimed at me. For example, she once joked, "You know my brother is still mine, right?" with this fake sweet smile. I laughed it off at the time, but the more she came over, the more those comments started to pile up. I couldn't tell if she was joking or if she genuinely felt territorial about her brother. Either way, it rubbed me the wrong way. Last Friday was the final straw. She showed up right after dinner and asked if she could stay the night because, in her words, "I just don't feel like being at home." I didn't love the idea, but I also didn't want to be the bad guy. My husband shrugged and said it was fine, so I went along with it. She asked if she could take a shower, and since our guest bathroom isn't fully stocked yet, I told her to use ours. I figured it was no big deal. She'd shower, we'd all watch a movie or something, and she'd go to bed, but it didn't go that smoothly. Now, I'm someone who splurges on hair care and skincare. My hair is a beast to deal with, so I use high-quality products that actually work. My shampoo costs $27, and the matching conditioner isn't cheap either. On top of that, I have a skincare routine that includes a prescription cream for my skin issues. I keep it tucked away in a little pharmacy bag because it's medicated and not something anyone else should use. These products aren't just expensive, they're essential for me. After she showered, I went into the bathroom, and my jaw nearly hit the floor. Half the bottle of my shampoo was gone. The conditioner? Practically empty. And my skincare products were scattered across the counter like someone had raided the place. Even my prescription cream had been opened. I was livid. Who does that? I confronted her immediately. I asked her, "Did you use my shampoo and conditioner?" She denied it. Straight to my face, she said no, even though the evidence was right there. I pointed to the empty bottles, and she just shrugged. Then I asked, "Did you use this cream?" "It's a prescription. It's not for other people to use." And again, she denied it. She acted like I was accusing her of something absurd, even though everything on the counter had been moved. I tried to stay calm, but I was so frustrated. I told her, "Look, I'm not mad, but you can't use my stuff, especially not my prescription cream. It's medicated and not safe for you to use. Next time, please bring your own products." Instead of apologizing, she rolled her eyes at me. "It's just a cream," she muttered. "Don't be selfish." Then she walked out of the bathroom like I was the one in the wrong. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, letting her stay the night, use my bathroom, and be comfortable in my home, and she had the audacity to act like I was being unreasonable. I didn't want to make a big scene, so I let it go for the night. She left the next morning without saying much, and I thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. The next time she came over, completely unannounced again, I noticed something off. I had tucked my products away in a drawer to avoid another incident, but when I went to the bathroom later, they were out on the counter again. The prescription cream had clearly been tampered with, and it's less than before. I knew she'd been using them again, even after I specifically told her not to. At that point, I was done. I didn't confront her right then, because I didn't want to start a fight in the middle of her visit, but I was furious. I felt disrespected in my own home. That night, I told my husband what had been happening. He was sympathetic, but also a little hesitant to confront her. "She's just a kid," he said. "Maybe she doesn't realize how much it's bothering you." I told him that wasn't the point. She's 16, not 6. She knows better than to use someone else's stuff without asking. And even if she didn't know at first, I told her to stop. And she ignored me. That's not an accident. That's a choice. We decided to set some boundaries. I told him I wasn't comfortable with her coming over unannounced anymore. If she wanted to visit, she'd have to call first. And she wasn't allowed to use our bathroom or my products again. Period. My husband agreed, but we both knew this conversation wasn't going to go over well. I thought things would calm down after that, but little did I know, this was just the beginning. By Tuesday, my husband and I found ourselves at his parents' house for dinner. I wasn't exactly excited to go because, frankly, I was still stewing over his sister's antics. I figured I'd just keep my distance from her, smile politely, and try to avoid any drama. But when she walked into the room, I immediately noticed something was wrong. Her face was red, peeling, and covered in angry breakouts. It looked bad. Like really bad. At first, I genuinely felt bad for her. I assumed she'd had an allergic reaction to something or maybe overdone it with some new product. I was about to ask if she was okay, but before I could say anything, she turned to me, glaring like I had personally sabotaged her skincare routine. "This is all your fault," she said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. I froze. "Wait, what?" She crossed her arms, still glaring at me. "You didn't warn me that your skincare could mess up my face." I blinked at her, completely blindsided. It took me a second to process what she was even talking about. "I didn't know you used it," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I told you not to use my prescription cream." That's when the floodgates opened. She launched into a full-blown rant about how I should have warned her that my products were too strong and how I'd ruined her skin. She made it sound like I'd intentionally tricked her into using something dangerous. Meanwhile, I was sitting there trying to figure out how she'd managed to twist this into being my fault. Before I could even get a word in, my father-in-law jumped in. "Why didn't you tell her it wasn't safe to use?" he demanded, looking at me like I was the one who'd messed up. "She's only 16. She doesn't know any better." I was stunned. "I did tell her not to use it," I said firmly. "She went through my stuff without asking. It's not like I left it out for her." He shot back. "You're the adult. You should have been more responsible." At this point, I could feel my blood boiling. Responsible? Before I could respond, my husband jumped in. "She's 16, not 6, he said, echoing exactly what I'd told him the other night. "She knows better than to dig through someone's personal stuff and use prescription products without permission." His dad wasn't having it. "You should at least take her to a doctor to fix this," he said, looking at me again. "It's the least you can do." I almost laughed at how absurd it was. "I'm sorry, but I'm not paying for a doctor because she ignored me and used something she wasn't supposed to," I said. "That's not on me." My mother-in-law chimed in then, trying to play the mediator but only making things worse. "Look, let's not make this a big deal. It's just a misunderstanding. She didn't mean to cause trouble." "She went through my drawers," I said, my voice rising. "This wasn't an accident. She used my prescription cream after I specifically told her not to." The conversation spiraled from there. Every time I tried to defend myself, they came back with something about how I should have been more accommodating, or how I was the adult and should have handled it differently. It felt like no one was listening to me except my husband, who eventually shut the whole thing down. "We're not paying for anything," he said firmly. "This isn't my wife's fault. If Sarah wants to use products that aren't hers, that's on her." The table went silent after that, but the tension was suffocating. I barely ate anything the rest of the night, and as soon as it was polite to leave, we got out of there. On the way home, I told my husband how frustrated I was. "It's like they're refusing to see what she did was wrong," I said. "They're acting like I'm the villain because I didn't baby her." He sighed, looking just as frustrated as I felt. "They've always coddled her," he said. "She's the youngest, so she gets away with everything. They think it's easier to blame someone else than to hold her accountable." The next few days were quiet, or so I thought. Then my husband got a call from his mom. Apparently, his sister had been complaining about me nonstop since the dinner. According to her, I was territorial about my stuff and didn't want her using it because I was trying to assert my dominance. Seriously? Who even talks like that? She made it sound like I'd been waiting for her to mess up just so I could pounce on her. When my husband told me what she'd been saying, I felt equal parts furious and confused. How could she spin this into me being the bad guy? All I wanted was for her to respect my space and not mess with my things. Was that really so unreasonable? It didn't stop there, though. Apparently, she'd been telling anyone who would listen about how mean and selfish I was. Some of her cousins even texted my husband, asking why I was being so cruel to his little sister. I was floored. The nerve of her to play the victim after everything she'd done was almost impressive. I thought setting boundaries would solve the problem, but things only got worse. A few days later, I found out that my sister-in-law had escalated things even further. She told her parents that I let her use my products, knowing they'd mess up her skin. Let. Like I'd handed her the cream and said, "Here, ruin your face with this." I couldn't believe it. They were acting like this was a crime scene. At that point, I knew I had to do something to protect myself. This wasn't just annoying anymore. It was turning into a full-blown attack on my character. And if they wanted to escalate, I was ready to fight back. After that chaotic family dinner and endless accusations, I woke up feeling completely drained. The events from the night before kept replaying in my mind, and no matter how much I tried to shake it off, I couldn't. My sister-in-law's accusations, my in-laws' refusal to take responsibility, and the sheer audacity of it all, it was infuriating. I felt cornered in a situation where I knew I wasn't in the wrong, but somehow I'd become the villain in their story. I needed to take control of the narrative before things got even further out of hand. I decided the best way to start was by consulting my dermatologist. Not only could they help me replace the prescription cream that had been wasted, but I needed expert advice on how to protect myself from the baseless accusations my in-laws were throwing around. My husband agreed it was a smart move, so I made an appointment and went in that same day. When I arrived at the dermatologist's office, I laid everything out for the doctor. How my sister-in-law had gone through my belongings, used the cream without my permission, twice, and how it had severely damaged her skin because it wasn't meant for her. I even told them about the drama with my in-laws and the looming threats of legal action. I half expected them to look at me like I was being dramatic, but instead, they were incredibly understanding. The doctor listened intently, nodding as I explained. When I finally finished, they leaned back in their chair and said, "This is actually more serious than you might realize," they said. "The reaction your sister-in-law experienced isn't your fault. It's entirely due to misuse. These are prescription-strength products designed for a specific condition and tailored to your skin. They're not meant for general use." They then offered to write a formal statement for me, detailing how the products were safe when used as directed, and that the adverse reaction was caused solely by her misusing them. It felt like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders, knowing I'd have this statement to back me up if things escalated further. But then the doctor said something that completely caught me off guard. "You know, her using your prescription products without permission could technically be considered medical theft." I blinked. "Medical theft?" "Yes," they said. "Prescriptions are legally protected. They're prescribed to you and no one else for a reason. For her to knowingly take and use your prescription product, especially after you explicitly told her not to, could be reported to the authorities. It's not just a minor boundary issue. It's a serious matter." I sat there for a moment, letting their words sink in. Medical theft. It sounded so heavy, so official. Filing a police report over something like this hadn't even crossed my mind. I told the doctor it felt extreme, and they nodded, acknowledging my hesitation. "It might feel extreme, but this isn't just about the products she wasted or the damage to her skin," they said. "It's about protecting yourself. You're already dealing with accusations and potential legal threats, and they are asking you to treat the damage the medication caused, which is not easy too. If they push things further, having this incident on record could protect you." I left the appointment with the statement in hand and a lot to think about. Part of me still felt weird about the idea of filing a report. It wasn't like she'd stolen my credit card or broken into my house, but the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding or an accident. She wasn't some clueless kid who didn't know better. She was 16, perfectly capable of reading labels and understanding boundaries. I'd explicitly told her not to use my prescription cream after the first incident, and she went ahead and did it again. That wasn't ignorance. It was entitlement. Worse, it was dangerous. If her reaction had been more severe, I'd be the one dealing with even bigger consequences. That evening, I sat down with my husband to talk everything through. I showed him the dermatologist's statement and explained what the doctor had said about medical theft. At first, he was hesitant, worried that taking things this far might escalate the situation, but as we talked, he realized we needed to make his family understand the seriousness of their actions. "Maybe confronting them with this will make them back off," he finally said. "They need to know there are consequences, and if this makes them think twice, it's worth it." With his support, we decided to face them head on. With the dermatologist's statement in hand, my husband and I decided it was time to confront his family head on. I wasn't going to let them keep painting me as the villain when all I'd done was try to set boundaries in my own home. We agreed to meet them the next day to have a serious conversation about what had happened and how we planned to move forward. When we walked into his parents' house, the tension was palpable. My sister-in-law was sitting on the couch, her face still a mess, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. My in-laws greeted us with polite but strained smiles, clearly bracing for an argument. "We need to talk," my husband said, his tone leaving no room for debate. We all sat down in the living room, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I pulled out the dermatologist's statement. "We spoke to a dermatologist," I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. "They confirmed that the reaction was caused by misuse of the prescription cream. The products are completely safe when used as directed, but they're not meant for anyone else to use." My mother-in-law opened her mouth to argue. I glanced at my sister-in-law, who refused to make eye contact, before continuing. The dermatologist also pointed out that using someone else's prescription product without permission is considered medical theft. It's not just a matter of boundaries, it's a legal issue. That got their attention. My father-in-law leaned forward, his expression souring. "Are you saying you're going to call the police over this?" he asked sharply. "We're not saying we want to file a report," my husband jumped in, his tone calm but firm. "But we're saying that we could. This isn't just about the damage to her skin. It's about the fact that she went through my wife's personal belongings after being told not to. Twice. That's deliberate. And it's serious." My mother-in-law immediately jumped to her daughter's defense. "She's just a teenager," she snapped. "You're acting like she's some kind of criminal for making a mistake." "She's 16, I replied, keeping my voice even. "Old enough to drive a car, but she can't read a label or understand basic boundaries? She is old enough to understand basic respect for someone else's property. I told her not to use the cream, and she ignored me. That's not a mistake. That's a choice." "Even so," my father-in-law cut in, his tone sharp. "This is family. You're really going to threaten her with something like this? Over what? Some shampoo and cream?" "This isn't about the money," my husband said, cutting off their excuses. "It's about the principle. Sarah knew what she was doing, and instead of owning up to it, she's turned this into a mess where you've been blaming my wife for something that wasn't her fault. If you keep pushing this narrative, we'll do what we need to protect ourselves." My sister-in-law, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," she said, her voice shaky, though her words felt rehearsed. "I just thought it would be fine. I didn't know it would cause all of this." Her tone made it sound like she was the victim, and I couldn't hold back anymore. "You didn't know," I said, incredulous. "I told you not to mess with our stuff. I tucked my things away and you still went digging through them. Twice. And now you're trying to act like this is my fault because your skin reacted? How is that fair?" "It's not like I was trying to hurt anyone," she said defensively, but I cut her off. "No, you weren't trying to hurt anyone. You were just being reckless and entitled. And now, instead of owning up to what you did, you've been spreading lies about me to the family and trying to make me the bad guy. That's not okay." Sarah looked away, clearly uncomfortable, while my mother-in-law opened her mouth to argue, but seemed to think better of it. I could tell his parents didn't know how to respond. For the first time, they seemed to realize just how serious this situation had become. After a long, heated discussion, we left their house with no real resolution. My in-laws refused to fully acknowledge their daughter's actions, but they also seemed rattled by the possibility of us filing a report. My sister-in-law didn't apologize, but she didn't say anything else either. It was clear that she knew she'd gone too far, even if she didn't want to admit it. As we drove home, my husband sighed, breaking the silence. "They're not going to change," he said, his voice heavy. "But at least now they know we're serious." The confrontation hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. And whether or not they accepted responsibility, we'd made it clear that we weren't going to be pushed around anymore. Later that evening, just as I was finally starting to relax, there was a knock at the door. My husband and I exchanged a look. It was late, and we weren't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, there stood my sister-in-law. Her face was blotchy and red, not from the peeling anymore, but from crying. She looked miserable, a far cry from the smug teenager who had rolled her eyes at me just days ago. She didn't waste any time. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly, her voice shaking. I stepped aside, unsure of what she was planning, but I wasn't about to have this conversation on the front porch. My husband stayed nearby, leaning against the kitchen counter, his arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. As soon as she stepped into the living room, she started crying again. "Please," she said through choked sobs, "please don't file the police report. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't think it would get this bad." I stayed silent, letting her talk. She went on, saying she didn't want her parents to know how serious things had gotten and that she was willing to pay me back for the wasted products if I'd just let it go. "I'm sorry, okay?" she pleaded. Her words made me pause, but not for the reason she probably hoped. It wasn't the apology or the promise to pay me back. It was the way she framed it. Don't ruin my life over this. It wasn't about taking responsibility for her actions or even acknowledging what she'd done. She was scared of the consequences, not sorry for her behavior. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before responding. You ignored my boundaries and then tried to make me look like the bad guy spreading rumors when things went wrong. You're not a little kid who doesn't know better. You knew exactly what you were doing, and now you're facing the consequences of that. She started crying louder, practically wailing, trying to make it impossible for my husband to ignore her. She kept throwing these desperate glances his way, like she was begging him to swoop in and save her, playing the helpless little sister card. When it became clear that he wasn't going to back her up, she lost it. She turned to him, yelling, "She's ruining everything! She's a bitch and you should leave her!" That was it. The little bit of patience I had left snapped. "Are you kidding me right now?" I shouted, cutting through her theatrics. "You come into my house, go through my things, lie to everyone, try to ruin my reputation, and now you're standing here calling me a bitch? In my own home?" My voice was shaking with anger, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to let her manipulate the situation any longer. She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. "You're not the victim here. You've been disrespecting me from the moment you walked into this house, and now you think you can come here, cry a little, and turn my husband against me? Get the fuck out now." Her jaw dropped, like she couldn't believe I had the audacity to stand up to her. She turned to my husband one last time, tears streaming down her face. "Are you seriously just going to let her talk to me like this?" she yelled, trying to get him to take her side. But he wasn't having it. "You need to leave," he said, his tone firm. "She's right. You crossed every line, and now you're doubling down instead of apologizing. This isn't her fault. It's yours." That seemed to shock her into silence. She stood there for a moment, frozen, before grabbing her bag and storming toward the door. "Fine," she spat, her voice cracking as she tried to sound tough. "But don't expect me to forgive you for this." I didn't bother responding. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching as she slammed the door behind her. I looked at my husband and said, "I'm done. She's not stepping foot in this house again." He nodded, his expression weary. "I know," he said. "And you're right. This has to stop." The day after I kicked her out, my husband and I went ahead and filed the police report. I wasn't thrilled about having to take things to that level, but her behavior had left us no choice. If my in-laws wanted to keep painting me as the villain, I wanted the truth to be on record. The process moved faster than I expected. When the authorities questioned Sarah, she broke down almost immediately. At first, she tried to spin the same sob story she'd been feeding her parents, but that didn't hold up under questioning. Eventually, she cracked and admitted everything. She confessed that she'd deliberately gone through my drawers, ignored my warnings, and used my prescription products twice. Then came the part that stung the most. She outright admitted that she did it just to piss me off. Her confession made everything clear-cut. The authorities determined that her actions were deliberate, which meant she, and by extension, her parents, could no longer argue that it was some harmless accident. They ruled that her parents were financially responsible for repaying the cost of the wasted prescription products, the fines for medical misuse, and even the dermatologist's fees I'd incurred to fix the mess she caused. I thought this would finally be the wake-up call they needed. Surely, after hearing their daughter admit she'd done all of this on purpose, they'd realize how wrong they'd been to defend her. I thought they'd apologize and try to make amends, but nope. They insisted that I was the one in the wrong. They didn't even make an effort to apologize or repair the damage their daughter had caused. Instead, they stopped talking to me altogether, acting as if I was the problem. My husband stood by me through it all, but I could see how much it hurt him to have his relationship with his parents strained like this. They refused to accept that he had made the decision to stand up for me, and instead accused me of manipulating him into taking my side. It was comforting to know he was in my corner, but it didn't erase the sting of being villainized by his family. Still, I knew I'd done the right thing. If they wanted to twist the story to make themselves feel better, that was their choice. I wasn't going to let it affect me anymore. In the end, they were forced to pay me back, and my sister-in-law hasn't spoken to me since her confession, which is probably for the best. I think she's embarrassed, not just because of what she did, but because she finally had to face real consequences for her actions. I know I did the right thing, because if I didn't, things would have escalated even more, potentially ruining my relationship with my husband. She was malicious and disrespectful, and I don't want her anywhere near me. But sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh. Was filing the police report and taking it this far the right call? Or could I have handled it differently? Please, Reddit, be honest with me.